Welcome back to the ADNA Presents. I'm Roy Samuelson. I got to say, today's conversation with Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker David Grabias, the producer and director of the documentary Brailled It, is really just perfectly aligned with what we stand for here. It's a film that hands the camera to blind and low vision kids at the Braille Challenge, and it lets their perspective reshape what cinema can be. And David and I go straight at the big idea that audio description is not a box that you check at the end. It's a creative tool that you can use and build into the storytelling from the start. We talk about what happens when filmmaking becomes audio first, how a simple, concise audio description approach can really orient every viewer, not just blind or audio description viewers, without stepping on the scene, and why Braille It, the film, is less gimmick and more proof of concept for a new kind of audience experience. David also shares the film's next steps, including its slam dance premiere and the larger outreach plan that leaves us with a question you'll probably keep turning over after the episode ends. What is blind cinema? So if you value conversations that push craft and access and storytelling forward, like this episode, please subscribe. Share it with someone who cares about film, accessibility, or innovation, and please leave a rating and a review. Those ratings really get the show get found. This is for Kevin. Welcome to the ADNA Presents. This is Roy Samuelson. Today I'm talking with David Grabias. He's an Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker who tells real-life stories for places like PBS and much more, and his work has been backed by groups like Sundance. His recent short film Flight Path won a bunch of awards and even qualified for the Oscars. David is also the producer, writer, and director of Brailled It, which I am so excited to talk with him about. This is one of the more exciting conversations that we've had in the podcast because it crosses so many terrains that we've discussed previously. So, David, thank you so much for being here. Let's start off by asking you what you love about audio description.
Yeah, I think audio description, it gets a bad rap, to be quite frank. I think a lot of people, having spent a bunch of my career in the film and TV business, a lot of people see it as an imposition, as a deliverable, as something that you tack on at the end of the post-production process just because you have to. And honestly, it's not something that I thought a lot about. I think I shared that opinion for the most part for the first part of my career. But more recently, as we've started to work on some interesting projects over the last couple of years, it's really struck me how audio description can be such a powerful creative tool and something that actually is an exciting creative challenge to address, especially earlier in the process, as opposed to, again, waiting till the film is edited and cut and finished and locked. Really thinking about how audio description can be something that can not only be a boon to blind or low vision audiences, but actually can help the sighted audience have a deeper, richer, more powerful cinematic experience. And with Brailled It, I really feel like that was our goal, and it was something we really worked on from the beginning of the editorial process and thought about from the beginning of the editorial process. And I think we actually managed to make it work. So.
Oh boy, did you. Thank you for creating this film, this documentary where blind and low vision kids are the ones that are holding the cameras at the Braille Challenge. David, I gotta say, out the gate, you've basically shared a core concept of audio description as something you get to do, not that you have to do, that you found that creative tool and not bolted it on afterward. I'm curious about how you decided that this was for this specific project, Brailled It, the documentary. Obviously, it was about blind people. And obviously, there were elements of it that needed more than just what the visuals were there. Was that the impetus for audio description?
Yeah, first and foremost, we were really inspired by the idea of collaborating with blind filmmakers rather than filming them from a distance. And so from the outset of the project, the idea like how we can integrate with them, how we can collaborate with them, how the filmmaking process needs to work in order for it to be not just accessible, but a creative opportunity for them was paramount. So obviously, as We gave cameras to 8 different kids, youth who were participating in the Braille Challenge. And then the film really focuses on 3 of them and primarily utilizes footage that 3 of them captured over the course of the 2 days, 3 days at the Braille Challenge. Once we got into editorial and started to put the material together, first of all, the kids had captured incredible stuff. Second of all, again, not surprisingly, when they were filming, they're focused on the audio of the scene, right? They're not focused on the visuals. And so their understanding and how the footage, how the scene worked primarily comes from an audio perspective, right? For example, oftentimes they were offered the cameras, they either held them in their hand or they were able to mount them on a kind of a chest harness kind of rig. And oftentimes the cameras, they walk into a situation, they start a conversation, and the camera has either drooped a little bit, right? So it's filming the floor, not the person in front of them they're talking to. Or they're seated at a table and the table is actually obfuscating the camera. So you just see the table and the tablecloth. You don't actually see who they're talking to. So again, in those moments, it's about the audio of the scene. It's not, the visuals are secondary. And so we really leaned into that and tried to embrace this notion or explore this notion of how cinema can be audio first versus visual first, which is, I think, a little radical and revolutionary, quite frankly, for the medium. And then when that is the case, like again, when you have a scene where the camera is obfuscated or isn't pointing at the person that the filmmaker is talking to, for sighted audiences, as well as the blind, low vision audiences, it's hard to actually to know immediately who is in the conversation, right? As for a sighted audience, so much of how we're understanding a film has to do with seeing someone's face, right? I'm having a conversation with you. I see your face. I see who you are, and I'm identifying you from a visual perspective first, and then an audio perspective secondarily. Then I start to recognize your voice and learn it and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, all of this goes to say that audio really was the kind of the first level of exposition and understanding and information. And so audio description really was just about providing all audiences a little extra information about who's speaking and where they are. So when the camera is obfuscated, oh, this is Christopher talking to Lynn, and they're in the ballroom, or they're in one of the testing rooms, or whatever it might be. And so it becomes, in that way, information, and the audio description is done very concisely. Once the scene starts, we don't interrupt it or add much additional information. So it's really about just as the scene begins, giving the audience enough information to understand what's about to happen and to contextualize the conversation from a character and a place perspective. We also really wanted the audio description to feel distinct from what a traditional audience might perceive as narration. And I know that the lines between those two things can be oftentimes blurred, but it was important for us for it not to be narration, but to be something different. And when we were talking about it, we met with a whole bunch of different folks, both in the audio description world and just in the blind low vision community. And the approach that we ended up taking was to imagine the audio description kind of being this little voice in your head, like a little friend who's just sitting on your shoulder or right behind you, who's just occasionally, softly, sweetly, just reminding you, oh yeah, that's Isaiah talking. And remember, they're in this room. Or, oh, they've just moved. They're just doing this. So in that sense, it feels less obtrusive and more organic. It feels something like a character or a person rather than some autonomous voice. And it becomes almost like this guide who's shepherding you through this world and just giving you enough information and enough guidance, direction, so that you don't get totally lost as you navigate this experience with the kids.
I've got such a smile on my face thinking about how that organically stays out of the way with your sweet little friend narrating and providing the access. I hear how many differences because of the way that this documentary was created. I can only imagine that when people superficially hear Brailled It and what the concept is, that there might be false expectations, that they see it as a gimmick. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. And I do think some people, especially obviously sighted people, they're like, oh, you gave cameras to blind people. How that it does feel like a gimmick or some kind of trick. But interestingly, I think once the kids started filming and we started seeing the material that they had captured, it became quite clear that not only was it not a gimmick, but that they were unconsciously or without really intending to, they were actually reconsidering and, in my eyes, revolutionizing what cinema can be, who cinema is for, how cinema is captured. And it sounds crazy, but making a film where your primary cinematographers, your primary filmmakers are blind and low vision makes you really reconsider what the medium is, how it works. And again, who can make it and who the audience is for it. And so I feel actually like they have gone way beyond it being just an interesting tactic or gimmick, and that they have actually, through their expression, through the work that they've done and the footage they've captured, the material that they've got, they've actually, at least for me as a long-term documentary filmmaker, they have forced me to really reconsider what the medium is and taken it to a place I never expected.
It's
Which is
beautiful.
what true art is.
Yes, yes. I think that I hear that innovation with the blind cinematographers. I think about the blind filmmakers I know, James Rath and Juan Alcazar come to mind, that they have a very unique approach, each of them. And that this kind of leveling of, oh, a blind filmmaker is this or it's that, it is literally demonstrated in Braille It that this is yet another form of it. And as you mentioned, you as a filmmaker have been affected by this experience. Can you peel back the curtain a little bit and say, we've talked a little bit about the film itself, but how has this experience impacted your own filmmaking for other projects that have come since this?
Yeah. I think, again, it goes back to this notion of collaboration. I think again, I'm a documentary filmmaker specifically. So especially in that part of cinema, filmmaking really is this collaborative exercise between the filmmaker, the crew, and the people that you're filming with, the participants, for lack of a better word. And I think historically, documentary filmmakers have done a poor job of fully collaborating with the participants in a way that feels authentic and feels true and feels good. And I think what Brailled It has done for me has shown me that if you really do trust and empower the participants that you're collaborating with, and really do find a way to include them in the filmmaking process in a way that feels holistic, that feels like they have agency and they are able to participate, not just as a subject or as a third person object in the film, but as a one-to-one collaborator, that not only do you get an amazing content and entertaining material and great film from that perspective, but you also find really interesting ways to innovate on the medium, as we were just talking about, and create something that is special and that I think challenges and pushes audiences in ways that are unique to that collaborator, to that participant's world. So I think for me, it's been about that. It's what does collaboration really look like? And with each film, how do you find ways to collaborate that really do allow the participants to not just be part of the filming process, but to help you make a really unique and special film.
When you think about the audience that you would ideally want for Brailled It, has that audience changed from the time of its idea of creating the film to where you are now? Or do you still feel like that has been a lighthouse? Has that been the guiding force? I want this kind of audience. The kind of audience I want to see Braille is blank. Has that stayed the same?
I think it always changes, right? I always tell people when you're making a film, there's 3 stages, right? There's the film there's the original idea. Oh, we're going to make a film about the Braille Challenge, which is just in your head, right? It's not real. And in order to prepare for production, you have to imagine what it might be. And your imagination is rich and wonderful and beautiful, but it's never 100% accurate. Oftentimes it's way off base. Then you get the footage, right? You film it. And while you're filming, you think the film is going to be something because you see what the people are doing and what they're capturing, and you get an idea in your head. And then again, in post-production, you have to separate yourself from that original concept and from the experience of being there when you're filming, and just look at the footage in a dark room for what it is and try to feel what the resonance of that footage is just outside of any context. And so every stage, the film changes drastically. I think for me personally, this film has evolved significantly. I think initially I was really challenged when I first was talking about the idea and developing it. I was really challenged to understand how we could make a film organically that would work for all audiences in the same, without having to make different versions. I think during production, things changed and I was like, oh, clearly this film is going to work for blind and low vision audiences, but our sighted audience is going to care about these kids and their experiences. Our sighted audience is going to be able to put up with, or how are they going to manage their expectations with all this kind of wacky action camera footage that we're capturing. But then during post-production, I stepped back, and with the editor and with the rest of the team, we were really, again, trying to feel the footage. And it struck me that this is an art film, right? This is the kind of film you would see at a film festival or on your local kind of funky independent or art house cinema. This is that. It's a feel-good story. It's a story with charming, cute kids finding community and succeeding or failing in this competition. But larger than that, like I said, I think there's something really interesting and compelling and expectation flipping about the way that it was filmed that I think audiences are going to respond to strongly.
It's great to hear how that audience has changed from blind and low vision viewers to a more wide-reaching audience. The irony that audio description itself has been created to reach an untapped market share of blind audiences. And this almost comes about it the opposite way, just the way you described it. I think about the art film aspect of it that, again, going back to that question, this is not a gimmick. This is an absolute creative innovation of blind filmmakers. And there aren't different versions. It is what it is. And that version itself is weaving in audio description. So huge congratulations for finding that path. I can only imagine the decisions that were being made as you progressed in this innovation. When you think about, let me ask you this. I think we're wrapping up here. What's the best way to follow you and your film if people wanted to make sure that they were on the top of mind, the next step of what's happening with Brailled It? Do you have social media? Do you have a website?
Yeah, we do have, it's brailledit.com, #BrailledIt on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram and where all the kids are hanging out nowadays. We're also super excited. We can finally publicly announce that we're premiering at the Slamdance Film Festival here in Los Angeles on February 21st. There's a couple screenings at the festival, and then the festival also has a virtual component for folks who do not live locally, where they can, during a specific window of time, watch the film online. So we're really excited about that. And then we're hopeful that the film will continue to do well on the festival circuit. And then we're working with partners like the Braille Institute on a really ambitious outreach and impact campaign where we'll try and organize screenings all over the country, not just for blind and low vision audiences, but for art house audiences as well. And then just really, we see this essentially as a proof of concept to encourage other kids to pick up cameras and to think about making their own films, obviously blind, low vision kids. And we're really excited about trying to encourage and create opportunities for kids to do that.
This is just great. We've covered so much, David. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed in this podcast that you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I think that's it. I really appreciate the time today. I think, again, I would just leave people with a question, which is, what is blind cinema? What's the cinema of the blind? And I think that is such a powerful and important and challenging question. But I think it's actually a question that hasn't been asked enough, and that where there is enormous opportunity, not just for filmmakers and audiences, but again, for the medium to be innovated and to be expanded and to be reconsidered. And so I challenge people to really think about what the answer to that question is. What is blind cinema? What is the cinema of the blind? And how can we make and experience work in that way?
David Grabias, the director of the film Brailled It. Let me stop here for just a second. You produced it too, right?
I did, yes.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No.
David Grabias, the producer and director of the film Brailled It, coming soon to Slamdance. And what a great call away question. What is blind cinema? Thanks so much for joining us, David.
Thank you so much for having me, and best of luck with all your work.